Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I was just saying to some colleagues that every time I come to Spain, I like it more. I've been coming since 2002, and the Spanish are getting more stylish, very clearly in how you dress, so you should be congratulated. Today I'm going to spend some time talking to you a little bit about the future of AI, particularly in connection with loyalty, and how I see that world starting to unfold. You've been hearing a lot in the session so far about how things work today. Hopefully now you'll see us go through 3 or 4 or 5 different areas. I want to ground this talk in us as humans, because when we're talking about AI, it impacts us as humans. I'll talk a little bit about how the AI system or ecosystem is emerging, and then a little bit about loyalty today. In particular, there's a nice little experiment between Kroger and ChatGPT that's a bit fun, and then a little bit about how we're going to transform and from today, and then a little bit of how do I think that you individually and your companies might get ahead in the process. So that's the talk for today. Humans, right? We all think about AI as amazing. But let's just start with thinking that humans are amazing, right? We have 70 trillion cells in our bodies, and each of those has 6 miles of DNA. And if you chain those together, they wrap around the world 200 times. Like, think about all that intelligence that exists and all that untapped potential. So it's just really nice to reflect on that for a second. But where are we putting all of those trillions of cells to use, right? So we tend to work in habits. Everything we do is a habit. So close your eyes for a second and think about how you dry yourself when you come out of a shower. And think of this the same today as it was yesterday and the day before. And if it is, put your hand up. Okay, we have an honest audience here. So even something as simple as taking a shower in the morning, we do habitually. Why? Because we tend to orientate ourselves to the things that are easy. We want to create a more efficient, time-sensitive world. And when we do that, we focus on habits. The challenge is that those habits become habits of our making. They may not be the best habits. And the same thing that applies to us as habitual beings also applies to you when you're thinking about loyalty. It's the same thing. We want customers who are going to have habits that come back to visit us. Right? So this idea of habitualness is the same for us as an enterprise as it is for us as a consumer. The second thing is that we are emotional beings. And why do I talk about this? Because emotion in loyalty is foundationally important. There are a number of studies in HBR that go back some time that show something like a 50% plus increase in profitability for customers where there is a felt emotional connection. It came up in some of the conversations that we have had. And so when you think about what that might be, just think about the brands that define you. So if any of you have got ChatGPT or similar on your phones, open your phone up and put in a brand that you feel attached to or close to, and see what values it comes back with and whether or not that might represent you. So just some fun to play with as we go through the conversation. But typically, those where we have emotional connections are where we resonate. Like, we have some sense that this brand is going to be important to me, and those connections really play out. It's important to think about that because when we usually talk about emotion, we usually think about it in terms of people and humans as opposed to entities and things, but actually we endow companies and things with emotion, and we place our emotional connection to those. So finally, one last thing about being human is we filter out very well the things that we don't want to know about or don't like or don't hear. So we hear the things that we want to hear. Why is this so important from the perspective of AI and loyalty? Because when we think about it, what we realize is that we need to speak to our customers in language that they can hear. So historically and traditionally, we speak in our language. We spend millions of dollars building investment in our brand. And our brand, we think, represents us, and of course it does. But that brand has to resonate. And if I'm talking to you as a corporate brand, then that's likely not going to resonate unless I can adapt the message to you in a way that you resonate with and can hear. And so that was one of the things that I think was beginning to come out in our earlier speakers about how Gen AI is beginning to be used, or it's one of the first places that is relatively easy for Gen AI to start to have some value. So if we now start to think about a model of behavior, and this model is actually foundational to how we might think about how behavior and AI interact. This model was actually first developed by a professor from Stanford, B.J. Fogg, and it was the model that was used to drive Facebook, now Meta, and their growth. And really what you have along the y-axis is a motivation score. What we're really saying is that for someone to change their behavior, to buy something, whatever it is, they need to have a prompt. So a prompt might be someone calling you, it might be a message that comes on your phone, whatever that might be. I need to have enough motivation to answer it. Okay, it's X person from some telemarketing company? No, I have no motivation to answer the device. So that goes under the line, right? And along the x-axis, you have ability. And the way I think about ability is really friction. So to what degree friction exists in the process that you are to change that behavior. So what's happening is that you start to see companies try to figure out, how do I measure attention? How do I measure frequency? How do I measure emotion? As ways to start to really try to understand how much motivation do you have as a consumer to engage with me? Like, what are the emotional engagements that I might use to do, and how can I make it easy for you? Some people make it very hard, like think about the sign-up processes you have to different apps and the legals you have to go through, et cetera, et cetera. Like we tend to be good at adding complexity into that. Of course, inability is price and ability to pay. Those things make a huge impact in the ability scale as well as friction. But think about this model as this model underpins really what works. But if you think about that, what that implies, it implies that we are going to be living, in fact, we are already living in a state of constant observation, right? Why is this so important? It's important because almost everything that's happening is getting scored. Some of the speakers were talking about how do I measure things, and yet we as humans actually don't like that feeling. We don't want the feeling that we are being consistently watched and observed. So those two things are requirements for us to be able to make predictions. Yet we also know that the value of being able to do this far outweighs the potential costs, except out of our own privacy and our own security. So we need to find solutions to think about how do we measure, how do we think about that. One of the solutions that's emerging and becoming really dominant is processing data at the edge, processing it on your device, or actually not having the data leave your own data centers if it's centralized. That's one of the first foundational elements. And if you think about what's happening in the industry more broadly, that is the way the industry is moving. So we're starting to see the transfer of AI models onto devices. and your data being kept and held on your devices. There are systems of privacy and ethics, and they're probably too complex to go into here. There are at least 7 different types of privacy technologies. And the thing to think about or to recognize is that they are needed to be applied at different stages of the life cycle of the data and insight and information as it rolls through your systems. More broadly, within the context of centralized data, digital twins are becoming, or privacy twins, as I like to think about them, one of the more dominant approaches to being able to do that. That means the data that I have to be able to serve you better, more consistently, more appropriately, is going to be made up of a composite, some synthetic view of you that is made up of people who have done similar actions to you, but actually in aggregate or in the cluster, microcluster that you are in, actually appear and behave very, very like you. So those are ways in which we think about how to deal with this issue of observation and scoring, but nonetheless, it's something that is incredibly important and a foundational aspect of the European AI law that's just been passed. Oh, not yet passed. I think passed, actually, last week. So when you think about that AI law, what it's saying actually is, yes, it's okay to use this kind of data for scoring, but only where its use is what is the original intention, right? So there are very specific wordings around how you can do this. But it's important because it's the foundation. So I'm going to ask you, what is AI? And I want to ask you this question because you can think about it in a very practical way, right? It's input data, it's predictions, it's output data. You can also think about it in a very different way, which is that we're at the beginning of a journey to create a new digital species. Why? Because the kinds of things that we are doing, we are creating new forms of language, of learning, new approaches, things that haven't been done before, particularly when the AI starts to train itself. There's no right or wrong in this answer. It's a question of how we want to think about it. But how you think about AI and what it means will define for you how you want to engage with it over the coming 10 years, right? Because you'll likely engage with it in very, very different ways depending on your view. One moment, if you'll allow me, because I'll use some of these terms later. When I think about data, I think about data as the ingredients that you need to answer your question. Insight, the why behind that, and information as the answer to the question. These kinds of nuances are important because we use these words interchangeably, but they actually mean very different things, particularly when you're thinking about the lens of privacy and how you actually might start to impact and affect the kinds of things that you're doing. For example, you typically don't want to share your data, but actually you're fine to share the why behind the questions, or actually the information that comes out of it. In fact, you're fine to make money out of that, and actually to use that for the benefit of either the consumer or for yourself. All right, so that's a small example of why these things matter so much. There's some recognitions, too, that AI today is largely American. So over the last year, I think the top 4 companies spent $32 billion. And so what you learn is that they're the people who are willing to spend the most. It's surprising. In Europe, we don't think we're so far behind, but actually in terms of spend, we are miles and miles behind. However, the good news is that in Europe, the returns are increasing faster than they are in the US. So maybe there's some catching up that we can do and make investing in European AI more attractive. But one thing comes out of the work that's going on in the companies, the large companies, the Amazons and the ByteDances and so forth that are investing here, is that something that we've held dear to us for a long time, which is that consumers want more choice, turns out not to be true. They want to be confident in the choices that they're given, right? And so when you think about the feeds that you get given on Instagram or any of the different networks or YouTube, we typically just want to be given the things that we care about or give us that hit or whatever that's the next thing. And so that choice is actually is going in the algorithms. And so there are some questions for us to think about as what lies behind that. So if you think about how do you make that kind of choice, how do you give people the one thing that matters to them right now, you have to think about and look at the data. So if you look at the data across these different companies and the growth rates, something stands out, which is the number of signals that are being used to inform the algorithms that are making that choice for you. ByteDance, 78 signals in their app, so that's TikTok, versus 4 on YouTube. Now look at the growth rates. So ByteDance is within a hair's breadth of overtaking Meta in its revenues, right? Stunning, surprising, right? And probably one of the most undervalued companies now as a consequence. So likely, because of the legislation, it will be sold off, probably to Americans in the course of the next years as part of the legislation that actually happens. But this is foundational because it comes back to this issue that we all want time back, and we want to be entertained, and we want it to be easy, and we want these habits that I talked about earlier to actually really be the thing that actually makes the difference. So now a little experiment. So this is an experiment not done by me, but someone in the States who shops at Kroger. And he started to realize that the offers he was getting out of his loyalty program weren't really cutting it. Now think about Kroger. For those of you who don't know Kroger, they actually offer their loyalty services to other companies. So they think about themselves as really good. not just good, really good. And so he said to himself, this is kind of interesting. So what they're getting right for me is the coupons. So every day I'm getting the right coupons for the things I buy regularly. It's keeping me going back. But there's a whole set of things that I don't buy at Kroger. In this case, it's toilet paper, as it happened. But nothing of that nature ever came from Kroger. And so he said, what if I could get GPT to have a go at this? And he started to play. And sure enough, with a little prompting, GPT started to come back and say, and offer suggestions and notice that he wasn't shopping in those categories. So what does that tell you? At the level it is today, and I posit that it is extremely early in the cycle that we are in, relative to where we are going, that the tools that exist can be used to outperform companies that are providing these services, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So it's doing the data analysis. Well, why can Gen AI and why can GPT do that for you? Well, really, what Kroger is doing is processing the data that sits in their own databases. It's not looking outside of that data to look at what other factors that might come in. And it shows the importance of being able to see the whole person. So the challenge most of us have in our loyalty programs today is that we deal with the things from the perspective of just the data I have in my interactions with you. Which is why, for example, super apps, as Alex was talking about earlier, are so important because they start to gather data from a wider range of areas that start to empower you, or some of the edge AI that might exist to be able to do that for you. So what does GPT do? Right, in this case, it's a substitute, right? So you'll start to see companies use those kinds of tools and perhaps not produce as good a data as if you were finding new signals to introduce, and you go back to the ByteDance example, the signals really matter, but it will be a substitute that you can use in the intervening time. So let's talk a little bit about, let's go on a bit of an imagination. So what are all the things that you would love to know about your customers that don't? Where else they shop, where they spend their money, and so forth. So what happens today? You usually ask, this is someone's system, and you usually ask your own internal systems, what do you know, right? And the data that you have from those interactions comes back and tells you something. That's the data that you use. But what if you could ask other companies, right? What if you could say, Disney has this data, I don't have this data, or maybe Repsol has this data. And then that begins interesting. And then what if you could ask consumers directly? Because suddenly, actually, the world opens, and we don't tend to think about and let our minds go to the kinds of imagination that this might have. Right? But what is it that's stopping this from happening? Just have a think, like, why isn't this happening today? Like, why isn't this the norm? Well, it's trust. Right? Most of us don't trust each other with our data. But if you think about back to any revolution, whether it's the agricultural revolution, where it was easier to grow our own food before it became easier to buy it in a store, or whether it was computing where we kept and maintained our own servers rather than running them in the cloud, the fact is it will become cheaper, much cheaper, to be able to ask others of their data than it is to us. But we have to solve the trust problem. That problem will be solved pretty conclusively in the next 5 years. Here's a bit of a roadmap that shows you some. So already you started to see the AI ethics framework starting to become quite dominant in 23. In 24, you start to see edge AI really becoming very dominant in the way that companies are thinking and moving. You don't necessarily see that in the market so much now, but you see all the development working going on in key companies. And as we work towards implementing zero-value proofs and blockchains and so forth and ledgers, you'll start to see the fact that this problem will get solved, and then the kind of reality that I just shared with you will start to come into being. So it unlocks trillions of dollars of value by doing this, really trillions of dollars. So how will we buy? So clearly, as humans, we value the things that we connect with emotionally, so we will have experiences. They will be very important to us, perhaps more important to us than they are today. Why? Because we care. We like going shopping. We like going out. We like to connect with people. Right? Those are the things that matters. I'm not a big believer in goggles and vision, by the way. I think they make you feel sick in half an hour of using them, and I just don't believe that those things are going to go anywhere. But I do believe that the experiential world will connect in. And the second area you will buy is from AI assistants. So it was referred to as a super app earlier. I tend to think about them as AI assistants. And the thing about AI assistants is that they're going to be dominated by a few players. Because what does that mean for the apps you have on your phone? Probably not very much, or probably a lot, because those apps will start to disappear. What you will use as your primary mechanism to do things is voice. Voice will become increasingly important, and the gateways to your voice are the things that hold the control, which is why all those companies are spending billions of dollars to create and own those spaces, right? There's no reason. So when you buy, when you advertise, where would you go? You would make sure your products are getting recognized by the voice assistants and the gateways to being able to do. That's a different world from the world that we know today in the way that the media networks and our approach to actually acquiring and using customers becomes. So just think about how that might work, right? Let's say my wife says to me, hey, sends me a WhatsApp saying, hey, thinking about, shall I come to Madrid with you next week? This was actually a question she asked. And my WhatsApp would pick that up. That's why Meta have WhatsApp, just by the way. They mentioned it the most times of anything on their last earnings call, right? So, and an LLM will interpret that model, that question, and tell you, well, what's being asked here. But then it needs to refer to a model of you, right? It needs to know what you care about. and what makes a difference, and so forth. That fact that I like to fly TAP, and my hotels must be like this, that, and the other, and et cetera, et cetera. All the things that are a nightmare to deal with on a day-to-day basis and take you forever. Then there'll be an action model. And that action model will figure out what action to take and how to take that action. It'll look at what choices are available and what are a fit. And then most importantly, it will start to coordinate agents. So if you think about AI agents as the doers, the bots, if you like, that will mechanically go and book your flight, book the hotels, and so forth. What does that mean? We'll start to see a world where those things are abundant. Your garage, your car company will have a bot. Bots will talk to bots. There'll be a network of bots that need to be arbitrated. And those AI agents will be working on our behalf to make sure that the things that we want to do are done. Why does that matter? Let's come back to Fogg's chart here. Because those things are taking the friction out of the world. So when you think about the example I just gave you, what you saw is that something that is too much friction. In fact, the thing that you wouldn't necessarily know is that around some level of pricing, I'm price sensitive, right? So I don't want to spend a gazillion pounds just because the flights are expensive, whatever the case. But below another level, I'll absolutely spend the money. And so that might be a hidden factor in the model of me that actually would be the determinant on whether I would participate or whether she would participate and so forth on the trip, unless she really wanted it, of course, which is different. So what you have on the left-hand side here is the right data. The world is awash in data, but most of us are not using the right data because we're using the data that we have in our own systems, in our own companies. And that data represents a tiny slither of us as humans. What we need to understand is the true data of who Professor Nueno is, as an example, for him, or for me, or for you, and so forth. And what's underlying that is behavioral AI. It's helping understand the motivation, the intent, and solving that motivation question. AI agents, the friction. So when you think about that, and then the final thing is the content AI, which we talked about earlier, we like to be talked to in ways that we can relate to. And so that relationship is really what matters, and of course, obviously, controlled by a single interface of an AI assistant. So that's how this world comes together. So what's stopping us doing this today? Habit. So it's what you do in your own today in your companies. We all have processes to follow. Those processes have been built for brilliant reasons, historically, to keep us safe, to protect us, to try to make things efficient. But you know what? AI would probably run those processes in a completely different way. And so when you just think about it in a very simplistic way, if I want to run a campaign, hey, I need to collect some consumer data from actions. I need to make predictions. Hey, but then I need finance approval. Trouble is, finance approval goes into a black hole and takes 6 weeks. So what's my ability? Like, my prediction might be the best thing in the world, but my ability to execute on that is close to zero. So we have to solve and think about the processes that we do today as habit. And I guarantee you every process in your business will change. How quickly is how quickly AI will get run out into the world today. So how do you think about how can you win, right? What are the things that you can do today? The first thing is to change your mindset from vertical thinking to horizontal. What do I mean by horizontal? I mean the chain, that process that I just described. Hey, typically we think that value is created by going deep in an area. But actually value is created with AI by being able to traverse the whole chain from its origin to its execution, to the action that actually takes place. And a nice way to think about that is elephant carpaccio. If you were to take a slice through an elephant, maybe through its leg, you'd have no idea it was an elephant, right? You would just have some shape. The only way to understand an elephant is to slice it longitudinally that way. Then you know that what you're making is an elephant, or what you're seeing as an elephant. So what you want to do is think about, how do I take the different value streams that I have in my business and actually build out the whole AI chain across that? And that involves you working across teams and so forth to be able to make that happen. But it's a new way of doing things and thinking about things in terms of thin slices. Next, you need to get data about the whole person, not just the company, the data that you have in your business. And you need to put that to work in the same way that ByteDance is putting that to work. And my suggestion to you is I would start by experimenting today with AI agents. Right, so one of the challenges we have is we're not likely to lose our jobs from it to AI. We're likely to get ahead by understanding how AI operates and how to make it work. And it's easy to do today. There's nothing hard about it. You can get going super easily. And finally, there's something important. The people who are going to win, typically in any given market, when a big transformation like this happens, are the people with the lowest cost to serve. Whatever your pricing bracket is, whether you're luxury or not luxury. So there are ways to think about how do you do things. Why does the edge matter from a cost perspective? Because you're moving compute cost from the cloud onto people's own handsets. You've just reduced your cost to serve, your compute cost to serve dramatically, as an example, as one example, and there are many. So typically things like that matter for how you think about the world. And then just one final slide from me, which is to think about how long do things take to change? And my answer is slowly. When electricity was first introduced, factories were all steam factories. And they ran off one spindle, when steam went along the whole spindle and they ran every machine. So it took 40 years before factories were converted to electricity. Why? It's just a source of power, but only by realizing that electricity would mean that you could not have one long line of steam machines, but you could separate and put the machines where you wanted to. That was the innovation that took place. So in a similar way, this move to AI is going to be slow because it's impacted by our habits and the processes we have. That's the limiting factor to the change that we have. So the companies that change their processes faster are the companies that will actually win quicker, no question. However, I also think it's going to happen a lot faster than you think it is. Well, why? Because we know that when AI starts to train itself, we get exponential growth. Within AI, Moore's law is history. It's gone. We are moving at a speed that is way, way, way faster than Moore's law today. So the things that we can't conceive today are things that will be happening quite quickly and tomorrow. So with that, I just have to thank you for giving me your time and spending that with me. All right.